Bon après-midi tout le monde. Malheureusement,
Good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, due to the voting in the House, we're a little late this afternoon, but we will correct that over the next couple of hours.
had a good day thus far due to some interruptions with votes. We're a little bit behind. Witnesses, apologies for keeping you waiting. That is simply the way that things work in Parliament, although seeing the clock is 4:29, I think we're actually starting right on time. So I'm glad that we're able to move forward. Colleagues, this is our second meeting in relation to a study on fraud and scams in Canada. Je peux vérifier pour nos collègues qu'on a pris tout.
And I can check with my colleagues and assure you that all the sound tests have been run correctly.
If you are using your earpiece and it's plugged in but not on your ear, please just ensure you place it on the sticker in front of you to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters. With that, colleagues, we've got 4 witnesses that are here in the room with us today. From Beauceron Security, we have David Shipley, who is the Chief Executive Officer. From the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, Jennifer Quaid, the Executive Director. And from Meta Platforms, we have John Camfield, the Defense Lead Security Policy, as well as Rachel Curran, Director Public Policy at Meta Canada. Welcome to all of you. Witnesses, you'll have upwards of 5 minutes each for introductory remarks. For Meta, I understand that'll be Mr. Camfield speaking on your behalf. And with that, Mr. Shipley, I'm going to give you the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this committee again. At Beauceron Security, we have helped educate more than 1 million individuals on how to spot and stop cyber attacks and online scams. I've spent more than a decade studying how cyber criminals exploit human trust online. Their business is booming. Aaron West, founder of the international anti-fraud effort Operation Shamrock, has called it the scamdemic. Fraud rose once again in Canada in 2025, hitting more than $700 million in reported losses, but likely losses ranging between $7 and $14 billion, as only 5 to 10% of fraud is reported. Fraud losses are up in Canada 326% since 2020. We're losing, and we're losing more than just money. It's shattering Canadian families. It's leaving seniors destitute. So let me be blunt about where this fight is being lost. If we think of the scam economy as a funnel and where each group sits, the online platforms that profit by selling scammers advertising sit near the top. And one company's products stand above all others. The Independent recently quoted Lloyd's in the UK as stating that 2/3 of their customer fraud cases start on Meta platforms. It's also deeply ironic that Facebook bans real Canadian news content but happily runs fraudulent AI videos featuring deep-faked politicians promoting investment scams and paying fake accounts promoting Alberta separatism. By Meta's own internal projections, reported by Reuters last November, the company expected to earn about $16 billion globally in a single year from scam and banned goods ads. That's roughly 10% of its global revenue. I'd love to know what the estimates are for the value and number of fraudulent ads targeting Canadians. Meta knows. Silicon Valley's own county is suing it, as is a U.S. consumer coalition, both for allegedly knowingly profiting off scam ads. The rot starts at the top. Everyone else pays the fraud tax while Meta makes billions. So here is what I'm here to talk to the committee about and ask it to consider in its studies. First, we have to make online platforms liable for scam ads that they profit from. If they fail to properly police their platforms, they foot the bill, not the banks, not Canadians. Make them accountable to federal agencies for reporting on fraud and their efforts to combat it. Second, legislate a 24-hour cooling-off period for material, unusual transactions a financial institution flags as suspicious. Customers can opt out, but if they do, they give up reimbursement. This alone would massively protect people from romance and investment fraud, the 2 costliest categories. It will help break the emotional spell many can find themselves experiencing during this sophisticated scam. Third, do not build a bank-only liability on the hook, and fraud costs will only grow for everyday Canadians. And the banks never pay these costs in the end. The costs will be passed on to your constituents in service charges and interest. We need shared responsibilities between online platforms, banks, and bank customers. Banks should provide and track fraud education with their customers. Without a feedback loop, fraud awareness programs are just noise. With one, and we've proven that in our work in employee education, it guides people to less risky behaviors. If a customer won't take 10 minutes to learn, that should factor into their reimbursement. That's shared responsibility. Here's what our data has shown. In our work with employees, we've shown that those who do not think they play a role in protecting themselves or their organization, they click 37% more on scam emails than those who do. Those who are educated and motivated to protect themselves fall victim less and report more suspicious activity. Fourth, properly resource the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. They are unable to meet the call demand they are receiving, and their work is more than just taking down the details. That group is a lifeline to someone who is despondent and contemplating harm because of fraud. Be clear in the funding for this agency so Canadians can understand how we're investing in fighting fraud. Perhaps this is where fines on big tech companies profiting from fraud on the backs of Canadians could be directed. One last request. I urge the committee to use all of the powers at its disposal to investigate whether Meta knowingly profited from fraud, as is alleged in the Reuters story. Canadians deserve to know the truth. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shipley. Ms. Quaid, turn the floor to you now, upwards of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all members here for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange and the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition. The Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition is Canada's largest coordinated effort to fight scams, bringing together leaders in financial services, telecommunications, and technology, alongside government, regulators, and law enforcement. We do it because fraud is no longer a nuisance. It is the defining financial crime of our era. Each year, it affects millions of Canadians, costs billions of dollars, and erodes public trust in our systems. This is not a trend. It is a persistent and growing threat. I want to talk about 3 ways Canada can begin to turn this tide. First, we need a genuine whole-of-society approach. Financial institutions, telecommunications companies, digital platforms, regulators, law enforcement, and government must actively collaborate with shared objectives, coordinated policies, and a focus on upstream prevention. Scammers do not respect organizational boundaries. Their operations move through telecom networks, banking systems, social media platforms, and into the phones of Canadians every single day. No single organization can stop them alone. Other countries have recognized this. The UK built Stop Scams UK. Australia created the National Anti-Scam Centre. And Singapore unified banks and telcos within a single operational framework. Canada has the will and the talent to do the same. What we need is the architecture. Second, fraud must be understood as part of a broader cybercrime and money laundering ecosystem. The same infrastructure used to steal credentials is used to commit fraud. The same networks used to launder drug proceeds are used to move stolen funds offshore. We need a coordinated approach that connects FinTrack, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, cyber defense functions, and the private sector, and treats fraud as the common thread throughout them. Third, and perhaps most urgently, fighting fraud depends on timely information sharing. Today, a bank, a telecommunications provider, and a digital platform may each identify the same scam activity, yet there is no effective mechanism to share that intelligence in real time. As a result, each organization sees only part of the picture, while fraudsters share information instantly and exploit the gaps created by siloed systems and outdated regulations. The Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition was created in part to address this challenge. But we need legislative and regulatory frameworks that enable responsible information sharing. Other countries have taken this step. Canada can too, and we have an opportunity to lead. The threat we face is not coming from opportunistic amateurs. These are organized criminal networks using sophisticated technology and professional operational models. If our response remains fragmented, we will continue to be outmaneuvered. Prevention must be our primary objective. That means real-time transaction intervention, network-level disruption of scam infrastructure, and meaningful public education that reaches vulnerable Canadians where they are and in ways they can understand. Canada has the opportunity to build a world-class response. We have an engaged private sector. We have law enforcement that understands the threat and wants to do more. What we need now is a framework that breaks down silos, enables real collaboration, provides meaningful resources where they are needed, and puts prevention at its centre. The Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition and the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange stand ready to help build that framework.
Thank you very much, Ms. Quaid. Okay, Mr. Canfield, turn the floor to you for upwards of 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and thank all of you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. My name is John Canfield. I lead our global trust and safety policy work on fraud and scams. Joining me is my colleague, Rachel Curran, Director of Public Policy of Canada at Meta. Meta takes the threat of fraud and scams seriously. Financially motivated criminal actors are among the most persistent and agile threats that we face online today. These networks operate across platforms, exploit multiple sectors, and often operate with impunity from jurisdictions with limited rule of law. In 2025 alone, we enforced on over 10 million accounts linked to criminal scam centers, which are organized criminal organizations that traffic and exploit people to run scam operations at an industrial scale, hundreds of thousands of victims driving these scams. We invest significantly in detecting and removing fraudulent actors and content, and we maintain active partnerships with Canadian law enforcement, regulators, and industry to combat fraud. Our approach is multi-layered and outcomes-driven. We have dedicated policies on fraud, scams, and deceptive practices for all of our platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Messenger, WhatsApp, and also across all of them on ads. In 2025, we removed more than 159 million ads globally for violating these policies. 92% of those we removed proactively, before they were reported to us. Overall, we also achieved a greater than 50% reduction in scam ad reports across our platforms in the same time period. In addition to policy enforcement, we're continuously strengthening efforts on our platforms to deter these scammers. Some examples. One, we are expanding advertiser verification with a goal of 90% of our ads revenue coming from verified advertisers by the end of 2026, up from 70% at the end of 2025. Second, we deploy advanced AI tools to prevent scammers from misusing the images of public figures to bait people into fraudulent ads. Third, on Messenger, we are also rolling out on-device AI to detect scam patterns inside conversations and warn users in real time, even within end-to-end encrypted chats. As the government develops Canada's first ever anti-fraud strategy, it is imperative to remember cross-sectoral collaboration is essential. No single company or sector can see the full fraud attack chain. A consumer may first encounter a scam on SMS or on social media. They may be moved to a phone call or a fraudulent investment site and ultimately lose money through a crypto or bank transfer. Each sector has a limited view, with no one company or platform seeing that complete picture. Effective disruption therefore requires sharing intelligence across these boundaries. That is why Meta invests heavily in cross-sector information sharing. Through the Fraud Intelligence Reciprocal Exchange, or FIRE, we exchange signals bidirectionally with financial institutions, enabling faster enforcement. Through the Global Signal Exchange, we share structured scam indicators, that's URLs for malicious websites, phone numbers, and also ad accounts, with governments and industry across multiple jurisdictions around the world. government entities are able to participate in GSE at no cost. Here in Canada, Meta supports the Stand Against Scams campaign alongside the Canadian Bankers Association. We maintain dedicated reporting channels with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, the RCMP, the Canadian Securities Administrators Investment Fraud Task Force, and the Competition Bureau. We participated in Operation Maple Disruption with Canadian law enforcement, securities regulators, and financial institutions. Alongside Canada, Meta has similarly endorsed the UNODC's Global Public-Private Partnership Framework Against Fraud. We're also founding signatories to the Industry Accord Against Online Scams with Google, Amazon, Microsoft, OpenAI, and many others. As Parliament considers how best to protect Canadians from fraud, we encourage 3 actions. First, a whole-of-ecosystem approach that brings all sectors of the fraud attack chain to the table from the outset: digital platforms, telecoms, financial institutions, fintech, and law enforcement. Second, strong information sharing frameworks with legal safe harbor protections so companies can collaborate in good faith without fear of liability under privacy or competition law. And finally, an outcomes-focused framework that measures results rather than mandating specific methods, allowing all of us to remain as agile as possible as fraud tactics evolve so rapidly. Thank you for your time today, and we welcome questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Canfield. Okay, colleagues, we'll now move into our first round of questions. And with that, Ms. Borelli, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Mr. Shipley. Mr. Shipley, seniors are often told to watch for warning signs, but the warning signs are becoming much harder to detect with spoofed numbers, AI-generated voices, fake investment ads, and impersonation scams. From your experience in cybersecurity education, what types of prevention actually work for older Canadians? And more specifically, what should Canada be doing differently so that seniors are protected, since the sophistication of scams has evolved past a level of just red flags?
Thank you for your question. The first thing in our research, what we've noticed is that, yes, you are correct. The technical indicators, being able to tell something's a phishing email or a scam, is incredibly difficult now, thanks in part to AI companies making tools that make it easier to make things look faster and slicker than ever. What research that we've done and done at Toronto Metropolitan University has shown is that teaching people about emotional intelligence, listening to their gut, and thinking about why someone is trying to make them feel a certain way, whether it's putting them in a rush, getting them excited about an opportunity, often preying on the loneliness epidemic in this country, helps. But I think the biggest thing that can help our seniors right now is that 24-hour hold. I can tell you I've talked to so many banks and their team knows it's a scam, but that person has fallen in love. They think that someone they care about is in danger and they need to act. If we had that hold, and it's important to understand, as an opt-out only, everyone starts with the hold in place, we would stop so much of the most expensive fraud targeting our seniors.
Well, you've partially answered my follow-up question already. So that follow-up question is, what would be the 3 most important pieces that would help seniors in a fraud prevention program?
I note that in my remarks, I've given footnotes to all of the stories I've referenced here, but Darren Taylor in the Aurelia Matters on June 5th has a heartbreaking story I encourage you all to read. Senior lost almost $1 million in increasingly common deepfake scam, which are increasingly still happening on platforms including Meta, but not exclusive to Meta. And so they're portraying our Prime Minister and others, and Premier Doug Ford was also portrayed, and a senior in the GTA lost $100,000. We have to hold the platforms accountable to police them. If they cannot responsibly offer advertising, then stop.
Should there be stronger rules around first-time transfers, crypto purchases, international wires, or payments made after remote access software has been used?
Yes, and there's so much we can do on that side. But remember, some of these attackers, once they develop long-term relationships, they'll coach people through a variety of controls and other things. So, you know, as my colleague Jennifer from CCTX pointed out, it is requiring a whole of society effort to combat this. But all of those things will help. Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Quaid, I want to ask about what happens after a senior has already been scammed. In many cases, the victim reports the fraud, but the money has already moved through the system, through crypto wallets, mule accounts, foreign channels. For the victim, the system can feel like it records the loss but does not move quickly enough to recover it. So what would Canada need to improve the speed of tracing, freezing, and recovering stolen funds after a senior reports a scam?
Thank you for the question. In fact, sadly, evidence shows that seniors tend not to report when they have been the victim of a scam, more so than any other segment of society. Most of the senior reporting that we see is from seniors who have lost less than others or who have seen a scam as opposed to having fallen victim. That in and of itself is a problem. What can the system do? The system has got to focus on prevention. No matter what we do, it'll never be fast enough. It'll never be good enough. AI, frontier AI, is making it too hard for anyone to catch, not just seniors. And if we're not focusing on prevention, then we are simply continuing to play whack-a-mole.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm good.
Ms. Borelli, Mr. Baines, I'll go to you. I understand you'll be splitting some time with Mr. Natumba. I'll allow the two of you to work that out.
Thank
Floor is
you.
yours,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today on this very important study. And you know, I couldn't help but notice many of the recommendations were very similar coming from Meta and Madam Quaid. And Mr. Shipley, you referenced the Reuters report. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and then ask a question to the folks at Meta, where Meta projected roughly 10% of its revenue in 2024 would come from ads tied to scams, banned goods, or misleading content. And then, Mr. Campfield, you talked about removing over 159 million scam ads last year alone. And these same documents indicate Meta users were reportedly served 15 billion high-risk scams daily, often letting them run unless 95% fraud certainty was detected. So my question to you is, with this, for less certain violations, Meta instead changed higher ad rates to deter offenders, effectively still profiting from the potential fraud. So why is Meta's threshold to confidently identify a scam so high? Why is it 95%?
Thank you so much for the question. Let me speak a bit to the specific numbers there. The 10% was based off of some internal research to identify the kind of top-line ceiling of potential violations. That included non-violating content that is often caught up in our systems, and included things that are not actually fraud and scams as well. So that is a higher number than the reality. The same document that was leaked, that was referenced in the Reuters article in 2024, pointed out the actual likelihood number is in the 3 to 4% range. And again, that was 2024. We've reduced that 50% in 2025, and we continue to work on that today. For the charging more angle, that's not actually, it's the ad auction system is incredibly complex. What it actually does is reduces the value of a bid in this auction if we suspect but cannot prove that an ad is a scam. This speaks to where we are on the scam attack chain. What we see is the very early stages of a scam, often potentially innocent-looking ads, innocent-looking engagements, new friendships being formed. It is challenging. Sorry.
So yeah, just maybe if I can jump in, just because of the time. But so like, how do you verify the legitimacy then? Like, do you do a reverse process of some sort?
We have a couple of processes. One is through information sharing. one of our most valuable signals is coming back from banks and getting, hey, these scam accounts are using these URLs, these domains, these identifiers. Can you look in your systems? We take those and put them into our systems and fan out and look for other signs of that. We're often able to turn up to 600 times more assets in our systems from any one seed that we receive from the banks. That is the most valuable piece of information.
Just finally, before I cede my time to the rest of the time to Mr. Mutumba, is the advocacy group Consumer Federation of America filed a similar complaint alleging Meta failed to block scam ads while charging those advertisers more to display their content, and rollbacks efforts to reduce scams. So what is your response to that claim? And then Mr. Mutumba will take it.
To directly answer that, we do not charge advertisers more. We reduce the value of the potential scammer, the suspected or possibly uncertain ad. We reduce their value in the auction system. That actually means long-term we're making less money off of the ad slot by letting other ads win that auction by penalizing that one. It does not mean we're charging them more and they cannot pay more to get a better ad slot. It just reduces the value of what auction they already bid into. Thank you.
Merci. Ma question va aller toujours.
Thank you very much. And my question will be for Mr. Cornfield. Meta is kind of like a city or a very large shopping center where there are many things being sold, and everyone has to sort of ensure their own alarm system is set in to protect themselves. We want to have an overall approach. I know the bank's approach is that, look, I have my banking card, I'm responsible for it, but at home I have an alarm system, I've got a key, and I ensure my own safety. But if a country invades my country, I say, well, look, it's kind of the government's fault. We didn't have enough defense. It's kind of like Meta. How can this fraudsters continue to use Meta even though you're in charge of the safety and security of Meta?
It is a challenge. The scammers that we deal with today are, as I said, the most adversarial that we face online, including nation-state actors, including espionage and spyware actors. They're industrialized and scaled in a form that it's hard to put into words. I actually think it's important to think about the jurisdictions they most often come from. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of victims who've been trafficked and are beaten if they do not scam and meet their quotas. And we're talking about places where the GDP of the countries that they're operating from is 40% driven by scam activity, not just on our platform, but all platforms around the world. And so they have a high incentive and low accountability for what they do and how hard they do it. And so the challenge is, how do you deal with such a scaled and determined and financially empowered adversary? We deal with disruptions, we deal with product change to make our products more hostile to scammers without raising barriers to normal users or normal legitimate businesses. It's a difficult balance, but we do invest heavily and we take the threat seriously. Thank you.
Monsieur Mutumba, malheureusement, c'est tout le temps qu'on a. Merci. Monsieur.
Unfortunately, that's the end of our time. Mr. Saint-Marie, over to you for 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good day, all colleagues. I'm so sorry to be joining you virtually here, but I want to start by thanking the 4 witnesses for their presence. Highly appreciated. Mr. Shipley, you wound up your presentation suggesting a question that could be put to Meta. Could you repeat that for us, please?
Know what Meta estimates is the value and number of fraudulent ads targeting Canadians.
Et est-ce que Meta, vous pouvez...
And Meta, could you provide us with an answer?
Get back.
OK, donc ça serait apprécié que vous fassiez suivre les données.
Okay, it would be appreciated if you would provide us with that data. Thank you to the committee. In the Journal de Montréal, a newspaper, on the 11th of May last, there was investigation regarding a file about the deepfakes that are costing Quebecers millions, of François Legault, of Doug Ford, of a number of influencers on social networks. And there are 4 people even videos, fake videos of Ken Reeves and so on. 4 people testified, really, brought this information to the newspaper, and 2 of them have lost over $100,000 each. I'm not sure if you're aware of that journalistic investigation, basically, because the journalists said they contacted Meta, and Meta didn't want to respond. What do you have to say to the people who have been scammed? Often this is what they had put aside for their retirement. It took them a lifetime to get this money, about these deepfakes being used on Meta.
It is horrible. These crimes are horrific, and it is deeply troubling to see that kind of loss in any situation, but particularly from retirement, as people are looking towards being done and being retired. So that is horrific. We don't want to see these type of actions coming from our sites, and we do everything we can to detect these deepfakes, to detect celeb bait being used on our ads and in our platforms. We've deployed multiple different layers of AI technology to look at not only the face itself, but also the context around deepfake ads. As we have deployed this, we've seen immediate adversarial adaptation. We started with the top most global celebrities, and immediately we saw country-level celebrities, government figures. As we enforced further down the chain, we saw them go local. This is useful because it drives a lot of effort on the scammers' part. It takes some effort on our part, but we're happy to do that. But this adaptation and adversarialness is something that we must expect from scammers, and only by truly undermining the entire economy of scams will we be able to change that.
Donc, je comprends que vous trouvez ça terrible avec raison.
So I understand that you find this terrible, but it is taking place on your platforms. I understand you're making efforts, but the scamming is ongoing on your platform. So what responsibility do you bear for these thefts?
There's incredible value in discussing across and working together across the entire fraud attack chain. Things that start on SMS or social media metastasize and move. They go onto websites, fake fraudulent investment sites, which even after we block, we see them stay on the open internet for up to 3 years, meaning they're also being used in other campaigns, in other tools, in other practices on different platforms. And so it truly is through only a whole society response that we can kind of share and take down how to deal with this.
I would also say, can I just add to that, if you don't mind, John? Like, we have reduced the number of scams that are reported by over 50%. So our efforts have had a real impact in reducing the number of scams that are reported and scams that appear on our platforms. So the efforts we're undertaking with John and his team are having a real impact. Have we reduced it to 0? Not yet, but we're making good progress towards that.
Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for that answer. So obviously we need to continue to do a good deal more. My concern is that there's a good deal of fraud underway, even if we're working on the websites. Much of this seems to be occurring on your platforms, most unfortunately, and you do have the means to correct the situation. Another point, as of a number of years now, on Facebook, we can't get information or videos shared across Canada, but we get deep frauds that use, supposedly, Canadian media. So does Meta intend to bring back our ability to share our own information, our own news, or is your policy based on disinformation, basically?
Canadian news to our platforms, and I'm saying that as a Canadian, not as an official representative of Meta. But we've said this before, we would love to bring Canadian news content back onto our platforms. In terms of where scams are happening, look, we are here to talk to the efforts we are taking to reduce scams. I understand a number of our colleagues, other tech platforms have been invited and have been declined to appear before this committee to talk about the work they're doing to reduce scams. But we think this is important enough that we want to talk to you about the efforts we are taking.
Dernière question rapide. Pourquoi est-ce...
One last quick question. Why is Meta more effective in suppressing the sharing of newspaper articles within Canada than in suppressing false videos that lead to fraud affecting Canadian public. Why are you better at suppressing our newspaper articles than in suppressing fraud?
That's correct. I mean, look, the Online News Act says that we either need to compensate news publishers for the material they place voluntarily on our platforms, or we need to remove news content from our platforms entirely. So we have chosen to comply with the Online News Act by removing news content from our platforms, and unfortunately, that's the situation we are in today. We have spoken to the Minister of Heritage about options to restore news to our platforms. I'm hopeful we can get there at some point, but we're not there yet.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Mr. Shipley, I'd like to begin with you. You said that two-thirds of scams or online scams, fraud is on the Meta platform. What are the other platforms that fraudsters are using?
So the precise sourcing for that was the Lloyds Banking Group in the UK. In the Independent on the weekend said that 2/3 of their fraud cases, consumer fraud cases, start on Meta-owned platforms. We also see in the literature, you see other platforms in the social media side, and then downstream, it's telecommunications, SMS text, fake phone calls, etc. on that side. But the vast majority, and this has been consistent, in 2023, Lloyds also reported it was over 54% of app push payment fraud was happening on Meta-owned platforms. They own the market by dint of their size, so of course the scammers want to go there.
Okay. And would you propose any solutions?
Well, I would say this. If you can't...
Hanging fruit, like some easy wins.
Make Meta liable for the hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraud lost by the Canadian seniors. The member mentioned the individuals in Quebec, until such time as the fraud ad stop. When they're properly financially motivated, they'll be able to make their billions in ads, but they won't be victimizing Canadians.
Okay. Okay, and Mr. Campfield, I'd like to ask you a few questions as well. It's clearly been identified that Meta is a medium for lots of online scamming. And based on the Reuters article, it would appear that Meta is well aware that it's being used as a conduit for scammers. What level of responsibility do you think Meta should take, and what are they taking?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We know we have a role to play in combating scams, and in a critical role. We are at the upper level of that funnel as described. We're in the fraud attack chain, as where a lot of fraudsters will seek out potential victims. To our credit or our downfall, we are one of the larger social media platforms, and so we are an attractive target, as has been said. That responsibility, that size comes with responsibility and many challenges. We must balance free expression and the interests of small business alongside combating scammers as hard as we can. And so we have to find ways to differentiate bad actors and scammers who will do their best to get around our defenses while making sure that normal users can access and use the platform successfully.
Just that you knowingly allow scammers on your site, and you do a cost-benefit analysis or a risk-benefit analysis as to whether or not they stay.
I would not
I'm going to disagree wholeheartedly with that. That's bullshit. John, you can talk about this, but we are working towards, working towards 90% of our revenue coming from verified advertisers by 2026. So we currently are at about between 70 and 80%, if that's correct, John. You can speak to this further, but we're working towards 90% of our revenue coming from verified advertisers. And there's a reason we're not working towards 100%, which, John, you can get into. But we have absolutely zero interest in getting revenue from advertisers who are scammers or fraudsters. That creates an experience on our platforms that is unpleasant. It's an experience that's not good for our users, and we want to prevent it to the extent possible.
Okay, I appreciate what you've just said. Many times banks are confronted with clients or customers, consumers that have been frauded, and they actually come to the table and provide compensation. Not in every case, but in a lot of the cases. What do you as Meta do for your customers that have been defrauded on your site. How do you back that up? How do you stand? What recourse do people have to Meta?
Yeah, it's a challenge because the act of fraud, the act of money transfer, we have no control over. We do not touch, we do not see. That happens in financial institutions.
Been defrauded based on advertising that originates on your platform?
If we know, to be clear, if we know an ad is a scam, we take it down. It is against policies, it is removed.
It's been scammed.
We don't have a route or path
So you don't
to
really
know.
care about people?
We do.
No, you
I
don't.
disagree. We absolutely,
That's all my
users are
questions.
our
Thank you.
only valuable commodity as Meta.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Falk. The next line of questions, I've got Mr. Ma and Mr. Bardisi. Mr. Bardisi, I'll turn the floor to you first.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask a couple of questions to Meta, and I want to start with Ms. Curran. You know, I think Canadians are watching this hearing with a lot of interest in the, given the gravity of what is before us, and I think they'd be very concerned with the unparliamentary language that they just heard. But I want to pick up on a point that Monsieur Saint-Marie made around the Online News Act. There was a very strong article in the Globe and Mail over the weekend in which actually Ms. Quaid was quoted around the kinds of fraud that are being seen online and the kinds of protections that Canadians should be expecting and the kinds of measures they can take around that all-of-government and all-of-society approach. A colleague of mine just tried to share that article on Facebook platforms and received the following response. In response to Canadian government legislation, news content can't be shared. This is an article that can help millions of Canadians, if they had access to this article through your platforms, actually respond to the very things that are the subject of this study. And so I'm wondering, today, could you commit to have that one article, that one Globe and Mail cover article from Saturday, in which Ms. Quaid is quoted, could you commit to that article to not be blocked for Facebook users and Instagram users?
Yeah, I wish we could. I wish we could, MP Bardisi. The reason we can't is because of the Online News Act, which prohibits us from sharing Canadian news content on Facebook and Instagram unless we are willing to sign up to the compensation framework that the government has set out in the Online News Act. So I'm hopeful that we can resolve this with the government and share Canadian news online again and on our platforms, and we are working towards that resolution.
Ms. Curran, I'm talking about one article that gives actionable information to Canadians on how they could help fight fraud.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, though. The Online News Act does not allow us to share even a single article on Facebook or Instagram unless we are subject to the entire framework that is set out in the Online News Act. So that is the way the law has been drafted.
A piece of legislation that has been duly passed by this Parliament. I'll share the rest of my time with Mr. Ma.
Thank you. So all of our witnesses seem to agree that the collaborations is critical for fraud prevention. I'm going to start with a question with the Matter Group is, what collaborations have you implemented already?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned briefly in my introduction, the Fraud Intelligence Reciprocal Exchange we actually launched in 2024 and has scaled the past couple of years. It is bidirectional with banks, and we have representation from FS-ISAC, which has many Canadian members as well, and other banks around the world actively, over 50 banks actively exchanging signals with us for takedowns. We're also members of the Global Signal Exchange, which is an international nonprofit that works both with industry and with governments and regulatory agencies. They provide their services for free to regulators, and industry pays and participate in it. We use that to both engage other governments as well as directly to industries where we do information sharing for multiple activities.
So, and yet you said you collaborated and implemented a number of measures. We're still seeing repeated scams over and over again. I'd like to ask Mr. Shipley and Ms. Quay to comment on that.
I mean, one has to almost admire the ingenuity of the criminals, but the reality is that we could be doing so much more. It's just the financial incentives aren't there to actually force us to act to, align this. If all of a sudden this starts costing billions of dollars in revenue, I think they'll get better at stopping Mark Carney investment scam ads on their platform.
I would add to that. It's more than the financial incentives aren't there to align us. We currently have rules and regulations in place that prevent the sharing of meaningful information in a timely manner. And if we cannot enable the banks and the telcos and the social media platforms to share information to get ahead of the scams, we're just going to keep paying more money. And that's what we need out of this proposed strategy.
And what seems to be stopping it is what particular legislation that's preventing that?
Part of it is a lot of organizations' fear of reprisal. Mr. Hamfield mentioned it in his remarks. The need for safe harbor legislation so that organizations can share information amongst each other and not fear reprisal for doing so. Part of it is rules around who you can share with, how, when, and why, and the length of time it takes for sharing of information. If we have to wait days or weeks to share information, the scammers moved on. These things are immediate, and that's what we need to enable.
So I believe you have all mentioned is the timeliness of that. Do you feel that's adequate at this point, or given the AI operating in the background, we should be able to detect it right away? So, Mr. Shipley, I don't know.
And just want to add, on the timeliness, as we move to real-time payment systems that move beyond our traditional reconciliation, there's no getting the money back. It happens instantaneously. My colleague's point about prevention is absolutely vital. We can't put the horse back in the barn once the fraud's already happened.
And in terms of the sharing of the information, if it is timely and meaningful, we will start to see patterns of activity very quickly. And that's when we head towards prevention. We can stop the next person from being a victim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mott. Monsieur Saint-Marie, c'est à vous, monsieur.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Still for Meta, your revenue, both worldwide and what you make in Canada, is extremely impressive. You're among the richest companies on the planet. You're paying no taxes to Canada, though you've got a lot of funds, I'm sure, and special funds in countries where no taxes are paid. You're a giant compared to the Canadian government. And the Canadian government has asked for specific taxes from you, and you're refusing to allowing sharing newspaper articles because you would have to pay royalties to journalists because, of course, all the news is going to platforms such as you. And you're telling us that you are working to avoid fraud, like up to 90% of it, but there's still a good deal of it. Do you think you're good corporate citizens?
Of our applicable taxes in Canada, that includes corporate income tax, it includes payroll taxes. So every tax that is levied by the Canadian government, we pay that. What we were not willing to sign up for was the framework outlined in the Online News Act, which would have required us to pay money to publishers for content that they voluntarily place on our platforms because they receive a benefit, a huge benefit. We have estimated that at about $300 million annually for sharing their content on our platforms. So they benefit from distribution on our platforms. We think the value exchange flows towards publishers, not towards Meta. And so we decline to pay publishers an additional sum for sharing material voluntarily on Facebook and Instagram.
Donc, je repose ma question. Est-ce que vous vous considérez...
All right, let me put my question again. Do you feel that you are good corporate citizens? I'll put my question again. Do you feel that you are good corporate citizens within Canada?
We value our presence in Canada. We value our Canadian users. We value our interaction with the Canadian government on a range of issues. I personally, as a Canadian citizen, would love to see Canadian news content back on Facebook and Instagram. I used to follow Canadian news outlets on Facebook and get all of my news from Facebook. So I would love to see that content back on our platforms, and I'm hopeful we can reach a resolution there.
Merci. Vous dites que vous payez.
Thank you. You are telling us that you do pay your taxes, that you're following the law to a T, but this law allows American companies that have money in tax shelters to not pay taxes here. So could you tell us how much tax on your revenue was paid last year to Canada, and what percentage of your revenues does that represent?
Shelters, we pay to Canada the taxes that are due to Canada, and we comply with all applicable Canadian tax authorities here. So whatever Canada imposes in terms of tax laws, Meta complies with.
Ben, je vous rappellerai bien humblement.
I will humbly remind you that taxes on digital services were set in by the G20 group under initiative of the OECD because web platforms like you do not pay their right amount of taxes given financial setups that you have. So I find this very unfortunate. Payments to the systems regulator in the UK indicated in a report published in 2024 that in 2023, your platforms in the UK were associated to 55% of the volumes of authorized push payment fraud. Do you recognize this as a fact, and do you recognize that it's the case in most of the countries that you're present in particular in Canada? And do you recognize that something must be done about this, given that most authorized push payment fraud is occurring on your platform?
In the UK, I can't say that we pay all applicable taxes in Canada. I think when you're talking about the digital services tax, you're talking about an additional tax that the government wanted to levy on platforms like ours because they felt like we should be paying more tax than was outlined in Canadian law. So, you know, that is a decision for the government, but we pay all taxes that are required in Canada currently.
Oui, ça, on sera pas d'accord.
Right. Well, we'll have to agree to disagree. Mr. St. Marie, you have enough time for one more question. Thank you very much. All right, then I'll put the last question that I put a little earlier when I was speaking about the UK. The report wasn't on the digital services tax. I was talking about the frauds. Their analysis having shown that 54% of the volume of push payment fraud, authorized push payment fraud, was carried out on Meta platforms, such that the majority of these frauds were occurring on your platform. Do you recognize and agree that it's the same situation here in Canada and that this is quite unacceptable? Thank you.
So this, to answer the specific nature of the question, push payment fraud is a trend that we see pop up in scams, and we have to deal with that as well. And so it is against our policies, and we take it down when we find it.
OK. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. St. Marie.
Sir, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the committee for letting me participate today. I'm normally not a member of this committee, but it's actually something that is really timely. It's happening in my riding in regards to scams and online fraud and things like that. You know, we just did a community event with online fraud. We worked with our local affinity credit union, brought in their banking specialists. We brought in the RCMP, or City Police in this case, and we actually limited the audience to 120 people. We could have had 300 people in that room talking about scams that they've faced either online or not online. And one of the big things that the police said that they have one of their limiting factors is getting information out to people of the existing scam that's going around the community at that point in time. So, for example, in Prince Albert, there was a scam going on where little Johnny, my grandson Johnny, got arrested because he did something not bad, but it wasn't his fault, but you got to pay his bail. So they're actually coming to your door, knocking on the door and saying, we're here to collect Johnny's bail. Now, seniors are very believable and trusting people when somebody, especially they're dressed nice and have a uniform, and they're getting caught. Now, these 120 people were made aware of that scam. And they went to Coffee Row that week and talked about that scam with all their friends. So now everybody in Prince Albert knows that scam that's going around Prince Albert that week. I'm kind of curious, you talk about on Meta that you take down scams as you come across them. Do you do a proactive disclosure saying this is a scam and put it out there so people can actually see what types of scams are being out there?
Thank you very much for the question. We maintain a scam prevention hub with exactly that sort of content. It's not always localized to a community such as targeted as you mentioned, but it is localized to countries. We also have a series of newsroom posts talking about specific targeted scams that we see, and we work with external research firms to look at different communities, different trends. We had one recently on elder fraud and current trends and tactics targeting elders around the world. We had one on romance scams and so on and so forth. So yes.
And you talk about this hub. I didn't know it existed. I don't think anybody in this room knew it existed. What are you doing to proactively disclose that you've got this hub? And are you actually shaming these scammers? And if you are coming across a scammer that's located, let's say, in another country, are you able to actually go after those people in that country? Can you actually say, hey, you're scamming in Canada, so we're going to take you out in Asia, wherever you're coming from?
Two things. Thank you. In the proactive side, that's actually one of my favorite tools that we use is a series of just-in-time warnings that we deliver to users, whether it's in messaging or with a new friend contact. We'll say, hey, this user isn't part of your social graph. They say they're coming from here, but we don't think that's where their location is based. Any one of these signals is easy for a scammer to get around and to break and get through. But a collection of them that we can feed to the user, say, this looks suspicious. Like, it could be legit, it could be your friend traveling, but you should have your guard up. I think that's the really key to prevention, is not focusing on one specific trend, because the more you do that, the faster the scammers will move. But to really focus on that.
I agree with that. I'll use, buyer beware also has to be a factor in all this. And just like the news on Facebook, watcher beware. And you talked about 90% of your advertisers being verified. Where I get a problem with that is, I agree with you, they're verified. But what they're actually being placed with, the posting that they're actually, basically advertising on, is garbage. It's an influencer who's getting paid by somebody else in the background, or it can be the Lego guys from Iran, or it can be groups like that all of a sudden my face is being posted in that reel. What are you doing to allow me to make sure that I can't be part of that reel, so I don't end up being endorsing a post that we know is actual BS?
We have multiple different ways to do impersonation protection, particularly for public figures. So we can.
In this case, you're actually taking my name without my consent, and you're actually saying I'm endorsing something. And that's problematic to me, especially being a public figure. But my friends say, well, I didn't endorse that. Yet everybody in their media platform says, well, no, you were on that platform endorsing it. So is that actual good corporate behavior?
I mean, I would say our reaction to it and our tools to defeat that and deal with it are very powerful and good behavior. We work with brand owners and IP owners, including celebrities and public figures, to give them tools to report and identify and to proactively detect.
This is the average person, that my neighbor down the street, who I think is an honest guy, and all of a sudden he's endorsing something that he's never even seen before because you've yanked his information and put it into that reel. The other thing I'm seeing right now is fairly new. You talk about things changing. Is the newscaster looks really real. It's AI, 100%. Talking about a current event, and it's enough accuracy to that current event, you think it's true, and it sways your opinion, but it's all BS. And that's coming more and more at people, so they can't dictate or determine what's real, what's not. So is it fair to say that Facebook should be viewed as just an entertainment platform and actually not be viewed as a newsworthy platform?
Yeah, I don't think it's news versus entertainment. It's that where that violates our policies and where it's misleading people and providing misinformation, we should be taking that down. Or, at least applying a label to it so that people understand that it's generated by AI and it's not real, and they ought to view it with some degree of skepticism. So those are all of the tools we're deploying now. And look, I agree, we can and should do more on this front. But where people are employing AI generated deepfakes, for instance, or videos that are AI generated, we require them to use labels and label that as AI content. And where it presents a significant risk of misleading the public, we will take that video material, take that AI-generated material down, or put a label on it saying, you know, this is not true, and you should view it with significant skepticism.
Question then, with your proactive activities trying to take this off your platforms, what legislation or regulations, and I don't want to talk about the News Act, we've talked about that enough and we have our opinions on that, but what else is sitting there where we could actually empower groups to have more control of what's being put on your platform so that you can make sure that I'm not endorsing somebody I don't want to endorse, or that you've got the tools to actually remove these people quicker. And I also want to know, what are you going to do? You talk about your hub. Nobody knows about it. You need a better job at getting out there and identifying scams. And then, you know, I guess the last thing is, you know, I use my example on your Facebook Marketplace. There's a patio set of furniture for sale in my next town. It looks beautiful. It's super cheap, too good to be true. Look in the background of the picture, there's palm trees. Well, I'm in Saskatchewan. Now, we're not as cold as Winnipeg. So how is AI going to interplace that? So you got two questions there. You get legislation that could actually open the doors, make it easier to get after these folks. And actually, I think we need to punish the person doing it somehow. We need to figure that out. But also the preventive side of it. How do we identify things quickly to say, hey, no, this is not real?
Yeah. In terms of legislation, I absolutely agree with my colleague, Craig here, on the protective measures for information sharing, and enabling us to do that real-time signal sharing will get a lot of incredible benefit. Like I mentioned, 600 times the results of any one seed we get back from banks. We're able to take that many times more assets down, which aren't necessarily active assets. They could be completely dormant, not being used, but will be used at some point in the future. So that actually gets into some preventative measures as well. In terms of direct enforcement, I think that's the value that we see coming from government interaction. Sharing with law enforcement and having law enforcement share with their counterparts around the world has been incredibly powerful. That actually results in real arrests of real scammers, particularly when they cross borders seeking medical care or R&R. Otherwise, they're operating with impunity from Cambodia, Myanmar, and other places where there's no functional enforcement of their bad behavior. But sharing that information gives a chance to actually make impact.
One little one?
Very quickly.
You talked about law enforcement. Have you been proactively working with law enforcement, creating a system so they can plug into you quickly? So when they come across a scam, like in this case, little Johnny being arrested and scamming, to get that out into a region. And you have that ability through advertising, say, we're going to only advertise in this region. Are you doing that with police forces? Are you doing that with local RCMP, local city police, county sheriffs?
Yeah, we are regularly. I can speak to what's happening in Canada. We're working with the RCMP and also regional and municipal police forces on issues like scams, and we liaise with them regularly about what we're seeing, and what they're seeing, they report to us. So we have a special portal for law enforcement that they can report into us, and if there's emergency request, they can send that to us very quickly. If it's not an emergency request, we can work together on how to kind of take material down and address it over the long term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hobach. Ms. Begum, the floor is yours. I understand you may be splitting some time with Madame O'Rourke. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon or good evening almost to all of you. Thank you so much for being here and for giving us the opportunity to ask you. I want to ask, do you think, and I'll start with Ms. Curran yourself. Do you think Meta has a solid enforcement mechanism for tracking down misinformation, disinformation, scams, frauds at this very moment?
Yeah, I mean, these are all different issues, right? Misinformation and disinformation, yes. Scams, yes. But there are always gaps between what we prohibit under our policies, our content policies, and then what we enforce against. So what we're constantly working to do is try and close that gap.
Because from what MP Berdizzi was talking about, it seems that you were able to take down a Globe and Mail article very quickly. Meta does have an enforcement mechanism to be able to take something down as quickly as that, as an article, which is harmless. In fact, which were something that would have actually added to the quality of life for people and society. Yet, and I want to quote the Reuters article that's been mentioned by Mr. Shipley and others here. The unreported document showed that Meta failed to identify or stop an avalanche of ads that exposed Facebook's, Instagram's, WhatsApp's billions of users to fraudulent e-commerce investment schemes, illegal online casinos, and sale of banned medical products. So if you're able to track down a Globe and Mail article that fast, and yet you have an avalanche of ads that expose billions of users, and you don't have mechanisms for that?
We do. The vast difference is the scale of the adversary and how dedicated and well-funded the scammer industrial complex is targeting our systems.
Funding. Meta was projected to earn 10%, I believe, from the annual revenue in the last years, just from ads, from scams of ads.
Again, the 10% number is a misrepresentation of the actual research.
So what was the percentage?
The research at that time was in the 3 to 4% range,
Okay.
not 10%.
So from what I have is between 5% to 10%. And even then, if you have ads just adding up, just ads revenue, and if we take yours, let's say 6%, that's about, or 5%, let's say, that's about $6 billion of revenue that Meta made just from scams of like ads that were scams and fraudulent. People getting scammed, like seniors getting scammed.
Yeah, yes, and so we've taken that number down. That was
That's
2024
astounding.
number. We've reduced that again 50% last year, and we're trying to reduce that number, or a scam reports number at least, again by another 50% this year. It's going to be a very long fight against these scam compounds, and we're in it to continue to represent and to take them down.
Mr. Campfield and Ms. Curran, while I appreciate, the ongoing efforts that you may have, like my community, and I know people across Canada, can't put food on the table, can't buy groceries. They spend $50, $100, $200, $300, significant portion of their income, and they'd come home with bags of groceries that are not enough to get through the weekend. And Meta made, let's say, $6 billion because people were scamming, and Meta allowed that. That's what I see. So I don't know what kind of efforts you have, and yet you're able to take down articles that are going to inform people to be more informed and not be taken advantage of. I don't have enough time, but I have so many other questions about your community standards guidelines. I mean, the fact that the Guardians reported Meta to be the marketplace for predators, and then you recently lost a case where children were being sold, and Meta was a top platform for that. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I would just say, look, these scams are industrial-level organizations operating in jurisdictions outside of Canada, and they're targeting digital platforms across the spectrum. They're targeting telecommunications companies. We all get scam calls and scam texts constantly, every day. So I think this is really going to take a whole sector approach and a whole industry approach to try and address these industrial networks and take them down. It's going to involve working with law enforcement globally, law enforcement in other jurisdictions to address these industrial networks. But they are not just targeting our platforms, they're targeting digital platforms across the board. And they're also targeting our telecommunications companies.
So when we had telecom companies and others here as well, and banking sector as well, and they're taking efforts. What I see here is the difference is that Meta is actually making billions of dollars by becoming a platform for scammers, for fraud, and for other things like sextortions, predators. It is so, to me, that's mind-boggling, and I think we need to have much better much better mechanisms to be able to tackle that. And right now, Meta is failing to do that. Chair, I'll give my time, rest of my time to my colleague here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this topic has done what is challenging to do, but I feel like this committee is really galvanized around the issue. We're tired of hearing from constituents who've been scammed. We read it in the newspaper every single day. And the platforms are the conduit for this. The platforms where they just want to go and share pictures of their grandchildren or catch up on news with their friends from around the world. And yet, the UK payment systems regulator in December 2024 stated that in 2023, Meta platforms were linked to 54% of the volume and 18% of the total value of all authorized push payment scams. Frauds that manipulate people and businesses. We're not talking a lot about businesses. We're not talking a lot about the romance scams either, which are, almost doubly devastating because they just prey on people's loneliness. Mr. Camfield, you said you can identify fraud patterns even in end-to-end encrypted messages. You said you have impersonation protection, and that we need to fight these industrial-scale networks. But Meta is an industrial-scale global giant. So I'm really at a loss that by allowing the volume of fraud on your platform, how are you not sort of reckless or a party to this misleading advertising? Are you doing enough on your scam prevention hub? And do you care about the people in those fraud centers that you say are perpetuating the crimes and the people in our ridings who are being scammed?
Yeah. The challenge with scams is that the victims truly are on all sides. And all these stories of victims losing money to scams are horrific. The stories coming out of the scam compounds are also horrific. We work in region. We actually have an advertising campaign to intercept people looking for jobs, which is how they're often trafficked into these. So we search intercept if people are looking for jobs in the regions where they are most trafficked. We pop up and give this kind of real-time information. Those pop-ups also direct people to the Scam Prevention Hub for education. But education is only one part of it. It really takes a lot of that just-in-time messaging to get in front of people and prevent that engagement. It is a challenge.
I'd submit, Mr. Chair, that the action that needs to be taken is to prevent those scams from being on your platform in the first place. Remove them and direct much more funding to scam prevention.
Thanks very much, Madam O'Rourke. I'm going to take a few final minutes here before we break into the next session. Colleagues, Ms. Curran, my questions will be for you. The first is, if a senior in my riding of Winnipeg South Centre were to lose their life savings in a scam that originated on Facebook, would you see yourself as being accountable for that loss? That question is for you, Ms. Curran.
Yeah, I'll turn that over MP Carr to my colleague, John Canfield, who's the expert on frauds and scams internally.
You are here in front of a parliamentary committee at our calling. I'm asking if you, as the head of public policy for Meta Canada, in the scenario whereby a senior in my riding loses their life savings to a fraud that occurred on your platform, if you, as the head of public policy for Facebook in Canada, would see yourself as accountable for that loss?
Yeah, I think we are accountable to reduce frauds and scams on our platform as much as we possibly can, working in collaboration with industry, with government, with law enforcement, and I think that's our responsibility.
Okay, so if that took place on your platform, you would say it's partly your responsibility, but partly the responsibility of the police?
Yeah, I think the fraud attack chain, as my colleague John Canfield has described, occurs across a variety of players. It may start on Facebook. It may start on a telecommunications company, on SMS. It may continue to a bank transfer. And so I think Meta has a part to play in this fraud attack chain, and our part is to reduce the incidence of frauds and scams on our platform to the maximum extent possible.
Ms. Curran, how much money does Facebook spend in Canada or globally per year in its investments around fraud prevention and scam prevention?
I don't know the answer to that question, but we can follow up with the committee.
So you do not know how much money Meta is investing annually to solve a problem that is costing Canadians billions of dollars?
I don't, but I can say over the last decade, we have spent $30 billion on safety and security on our platforms, and that includes frauds and scams.
Do you worry that investment in fraud prevention will hurt your bottom line as a company?
Not at all. Listen, Meta does not want to be making money from frauds and scams. I think my colleague John Campfield can speak to that.
But
we
are you
want
making
our
money?
platform to be a safe, pleasant place for our users, and that it does not include having them scammed or defrauded on Facebook or Instagram.
Are you making money off of fraud?
To my knowledge, John, I don't know. I can't answer that question, John.
Sure, I'll allow Mr. Shipley, perhaps as an expert in this field, to offer a
Well,
quick
Mr.
view of
Shipley
that.
seems to be offering stats from the UK, which are not
question is for Ms.
applicable to
Shipley,
Canada.
Ms. Curran. The floor is not
He
yours.
seems also to be getting his
Shipley?
statistics from UK
I'm just
media
going to,
coverage,
call
which
you
are
to
not.
order. I know you have a long history in Parliament, Ms. Curran. Surely you're familiar with the rules of Parliament. As chair of the committee, I dictate who has the floor, and I'm going to provide Mr. Shipley with the floor for a moment. I'll return with one further question before we suspend. The floor is yours, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would go back to the member's question earlier where we were doing some calculations where, okay, the number is not 16 billion, it's 6 billion, right? So that was the percentages we heard, and we did the quick math. So that was revenue. They made money off of fraud. They may not have wanted the money. I genuinely believe them. But they absolutely made the money. And there's one last point I want to make. I used to be a reporter. Our local media is gone in this country. We're deserts because the advertising revenue that used to support local journalism that didn't have fraud ads page after page in it was eaten by companies like this. And they've taken no responsibility for these deserts, but they offer them a pittance with this line about $300 million. But they steal billions of dollars, or sorry, they enable the theft of billions of dollars. It's an outrage.
Well, now we see Mr. Shipley's actual motivation,
Curran,
which is to ensure news publishers.
If you could cut the mic for Ms. Curran, please, at the moment.
Well, that is his real motivation. It's not his real
So I'm going to ask for a little bit of order here. I'm going to ask for a little bit of order. Thank you. My final question will be for you, Ms. Curran. You've committed, and I appreciate that commitment, to provide the committee in writing through the clerk how much money that Facebook has invested in Canada or globally on fraud prevention. I have a feeling that members from political parties around the table, if they don't receive that information in a timely fashion, may be interested in raising that in other parliamentary platforms. But assuming that you get that number back to us in a timely fashion and that number is accurate, and it proves, once you've done your research internally, there's a second component I think we need. So there's two things I'd ask you for. The first is, how much money is Facebook Canada investing in Canada or internationally, if you feel that you can't dissect the two markets, on fraud prevention? And two, how much do you estimate you have earned from fraud or scams that have occurred on your platforms in Canada or internationally? And then the third thing I'd like you to please provide to the committee would be this. If it turns out that the amount of money that you have made, to Mr. Shipley's point, perhaps unintentionally, on your platforms through fraud, if that amount of money ends up being more, which I suspect it is significantly, than what you've invested, will you commit in writing back to this committee that you will invest the difference back into fraud prevention? Those are the three things that I would ask you report back, please, Ms. Curran, to the committee at your convenience.
Yes, we can absolutely do that. And I would say we have invested $30 billion in fraud, anti-fraud measures, safety measures, security measures on our platforms over the last decade. I would be very surprised if that number was less than what has been lost, unfortunately, to really tragic and unfortunate instances of scams on our platforms. But we will certainly report back to you on that.
Okay, my final question, Ms. Curran, to you is this. And perhaps it's more of a point of reflection than anything regarding technical policy, and it gets to a question my colleague, Madame O'Rourke, asked you a few moments ago. I've been a parliamentarian for a number of years. I've been around Parliament for a very long time. I have never seen, either in my capacity as a chair or as a member of Parliament, a witness receive, or a set of witnesses receive, as much unanimity in relation to the subject line or the content of the question across parties that you have received today. What I'd like you to offer a reflection on is, why is it that you believe that Conservative, Bloc, and Liberal members of Parliament are all taking the very precious time that they have around a committee table to ask you the same questions? And why do you think it is that they are responding, as we've seen from all sides around the political spectrum today, with an attitude that seems to be less than satisfied in regard to the answers that they've been receiving?
Yeah, I think this is because this is a serious issue. It's a serious issue for Canadians. We ought to address it. I know you invited some of our colleagues here today from other members of the tech industry who declined to appear. But we wanted to be here because this is an important issue. We want to ensure that we reduce the incidence of frauds and scams in Canada. We want to make sure that our platforms are not a place where Canadians get defrauded or scammed. And so we want to engage with policymakers like the members of this committee to ensure that we're working together to decrease the incidence of that. So honestly, Mr. Chair, that's why we're here.
Okay, I appreciate that. Mr. Shipley, Ms. Quaid, Mr. Camfield, Ms. Curran, thank you for availing yourselves to the committee today for an important conversation in regards to the role that a variety of different industry players and, of course, the citizenry and public policymakers in Canada play in terms of ensuring the health and well-being of all of those across the country vis-a-vis protection against fraud and scams. Appreciate your time, colleagues. I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes while we turn over to our next witness who will be appearing online. ask remaining witnesses or members if they could take their conversations outside, please. We're going to continue our second hour here. So, colleagues, if everybody could take their seat, please. Okay, we are running significantly over time, and we are going to do our best to squeeze in a good, solid conversation here. So we have from the Australian Banking Association, Nicholas Giurietto. I hope I have that right, Giurietto. Sir, it's the other side of the world and a different time of day. You have a full day ahead of you. We have got a full day behind us, and we're looking to add a little bit to that. So thank you very much for availing yourselves. We certainly appreciate the deep bond and partnership between our two countries. Sir, you're going to have upwards of 5 minutes. I know there's a lot of interest in what you have to say. This is only the second meeting we've held in relation to this study, but the Australian example has been raised on numerous occasions, and we look forward to understanding a little bit more about that through your testimony. So with that, sir, the floor is yours for upwards of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, good morning from Australia. My name is Nicholas Giurietto, and I head the financial crime policy at the Australian Banking Association. That's the main industry representative body for the banking sector in Australia. My area of responsibility includes AML-CTF, cybersecurity and scams, and I've been heavily involved in the development and now the implementation of the Australian government's scam prevention framework. This has involved collaboration with government policy bodies, various regulators, and colleagues from other industry sectors. The unifying purpose of all of these stakeholders is a shared desire to keep Australians as safe as possible from the scourge of scams conducted by global organised crime gangs. Our approach is to work together to stop scams before they happen, not simply requiring one part of the scam chain to take responsibility for protecting or refunding customers. It's about acknowledging the complexity of our digital world by working together to stop scams at the source. Australia's scam prevention framework has attracted a lot of attention around the world as the first example of an anti-scams regulatory regime based on the principle that all industry sectors must do their share to tackle scams. Going first is hard. There are many details to be worked through in translating an important, simple policy proposition into real-world implementation. That can be difficult in practice, and some of those challenges still remain to be resolved in Australia. Nevertheless, the early signs are positive, and we remain more convinced than ever that the only way to minimise the devastating harm of scams that scams cause to everyday Australians is a coordinated, cross-sectoral ecosystem approach with each industry sector doing their bit. The scam prevention framework has two basic principles. Firstly, recognising that sophisticated methods of a scam attack occur across industry sectors, and indeed they often deliberately exploit the gaps between them. The scam prevention framework requires all sectors in the scam chain to take appropriate action to prevent, detect, and respond to scam attacks. Each sector has responsibility to harden their business processes against scammers with analogous but industry-specific obligations. For example, the requirement on banks to apply rigorous know your customer checks when opening an account is matched with an analogous obligation on telcos to check the legitimate business need for a SIM box capable of sending tens of thousands of SMS messages in an hour, or an obligation on digital platforms to confirm the bona fides of an advertiser of an investment product. The exact obligations are different, but the purpose for each sector is the same. Try to keep bad actors out of the system from the start. In Australia, we have commenced the SPF rollout with the three core sectors of banks, telcos, and digital platforms. This acknowledges the practical fact that you have to start somewhere. However, it's acknowledged that our national suit of armour against scams will not be complete until all other sectors that can be involved in a scam chain are also part of the coordinated response. These include crypto exchanges, non-bank money remitters, remote access software providers, online marketplaces, gift card providers, and many more. unfortunately, the ingenuity of scammers knows few limits, and it is of little comfort to a scam victim to know that the front door to their life savings has been kept secure when thieves have been able to climb in the window. The second key principle of the SPF is cross-industry data sharing, facilitating the secure and privacy-compliant exchange of data that indicates a scam risk, actionable scams intelligence, as it is described in the SPF legislation, is an essential tool in the anti-scam response. Despite the best efforts of all participants, it is not always possible to protect the first victim from a scam. But the rapid exchange of actionable scams intelligence followed by prompt action, for example, taking down a scam website or blocking a compromised telephone or bank account, can quickly close that vulnerability and protect the hundreds or even thousands of potential subsequent victims. The scammers can continue to probe the defenses, but by reducing their success rate and increasing the cost of their business model, we make Australia a less attractive target. The most effective approach to deliver cross-industry data sharing is through private-to-private collaboration. For example, through the Australian Financial Crimes Exchange, who I understand will be providing testimony today, with appropriate linkages to law enforcement. The key role of government is to provide the policy framework that enables secure and privacy-compliant data exchange with appropriate safe harbor protections. I will conclude my initial comments at this point and will be delighted to offer any further insights from our experience in Australia that the committee may wish to request.
Thank you very much, sir. And where I didn't ask, where in Australia are you coming in from?
From Sydney.
From Sydney. Wonderful. Okay, Mr. Guglielmin, the floor is yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witness for his opening testimony and taking the time to come to us all the way from down under. As we all know at this committee, this is a very important and timely study. All of us in our ridings have heard countless stories about different circumstances surrounding fraud, seniors who have been subjected to fraud. I have a personal story where someone was, over a period of 9 months, what started as a technical scam, was scammed out of their entire life savings. So originated as something that popped up on their computer and then turned into a 9-month, drawn-out long psychological scam where someone was thought they were dealing with the FBI and ended up forking over their entire life savings, and no accountability to any of the institutions that allowed this money to be turned over, and really there was no recourse for this individual. Australia is particularly important for us to hear from because you guys are described as your prevention framework as having an ecosystem approach, one that recognizes, as you said, that scams begin upstream before the money ever moves. And I was just wondering if you could walk the committee through what that means in practice, who's regulated, what obligations apply, how the system links banks, telecoms, and digital platforms in one single chain of accountability.
Thank you, sir. So the Scam Prevention Framework legislation passed the Australian Parliament in February of last year. The enabling legislation has begun to, the enabling regulation has begun to work its way through the system. But the basic structure is that each key industry sector, the digital platforms, the telecommunications sector, and the banking sector, have a set of obligations under the headings of detect, prevent, and respond to scams. There are a few others such as governance, etc., but the three most important ones. They are responsible to their sector regulator. So in the case of the banking sector, our normal regulator, the Australian Securities Investment Corporation Commission, is the regulator for us for scams. Similarly for telcos, their regulator, and for the platforms, they've actually had to find a new regulator because until now there wasn't one. So each of those sectors have code obligations that they owe to or are managed by those sector regulators. Across that, there's a new super regulator, if you like, that sits horizontally for the issue of scams across all of the sectors. And its role is to make sure that the obligations are sort of joined up and equivalent. So in my opening statement, I made the comment that keeping bad people out of your system in the first place is one way to help protect your citizens. Now, for banks, we do that through KYC, through telcos. If someone really wants to be able to send 10,000 SMSs in a minute, and there are legitimate use cases for that, find out who they are and is that a genuine use case, right? Don't let anybody use that product. Similarly for the platforms, if someone wants to advertise a financial product, check that they actually hold an Australian financial services license, which is the license that's required to offer investment products in Australia, before you allow them to advertise their product. So the obligations are different for each sector, but they have the same flavor because they have the same purpose.
Mr. Guggenheim, I'm sorry, Mr. Giorgetto, I thought you might have been done there, and I was, before passing it back to Mr. Guggenheim, just going to say we do have another witness that's joined us, David Pegley, who is the Managing Director, Australian Financial Crimes Exchanges. Mr. Pegley, welcome. Unfortunately, we won't have time for you to provide an introductory remark. However, colleagues, you are more than welcome to ask Mr. Pegley questions as a witness here today. Mr. Guggenheim, there remain just over 2 minutes for you, sir.
So, interject here. So Canada currently places the bulk of its obligations on banks who see the fraud only after the money's actually moved. So from Australia's experience, what happens if the government places that burden on banks while platforms and telecom companies have fewer obligations?
So the Australian ecosystem specifically makes all of those sectors and future sectors equally responsible to take their share. If it's banks alone, you end up with trying to sort of stop the fire when it's already raging, right? And there are things that banks can and should and must do to secure their platforms, but particularly for the telcos and the platforms, when they take action earlier, it's possible to intervene with the scams earlier. And the vital link here is sharing information across the sectors. So when a bank becomes aware of a scam victim, if we can share that information with a telco or with a platform, it is too late to help that first victim. That is true, and that is devastating. But at least the information can then be shared back to clean up the pipeline of future victims. And so over time, it makes it a more expensive proposition for the scammers to target Australia as opposed to perhaps another country. And therefore, they might put their efforts elsewhere.
You noted that around 90% of scam losses in Australia come from individual losses exceeding $5,000, losses the ABA describes as life-changing. So who's experiencing those losses most acutely?
The range of people who become subject to scams is all of society. There's sometimes a bit of a stereotype that it is only the elderly or only those who become victims to scams. The reality is the scammers are brilliant psychologists, and they will find a way to get to just about everybody. It could be a parent doing drop-off for their children at school, responding to a text message while they're trying to park their car. Like there are so many ways that they will do it. So there is no classic pattern. Every citizen is a potential scam victim, and every citizen therefore needs some support in being protected from that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Guggenheim. Going to Madame O'Rourke now for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Through you to Mr. Giorgetto or Mr. Pegley. The government currently has legislation in front of the House on lawful access, which enables law enforcement to have more access to platforms in order to rapidly intercept crimes. And those could be, they could be scams, they could be human trafficking. I'm just wondering if you can tell us how important has Australia's lawful access been to help you tackle fraud?
Engagement with law, I might let David take some of this, but engagement with law enforcement is an absolutely vital part of the overall scam and fraud response. I think, like Canada, Australia has a federal system with overlapping police responsibilities that can sometimes make things a little bit complicated to navigate. But being able to do that intelligence sharing and take action, either to share the intel or in some cases to support law enforcement in taking action, is very important. But I would say that the private to private data sharing is at least equally important, in that sometimes the private sector can use so-called scam signals that fall short of the legal standard that law enforcement might need to do before you could initiate a prosecution or some other action. But simply information that can be shared to say, hey, watch out for this one. There might be some possibilities here to take action, flag a risk. And that's very important as well. So the two can operate together.
Did you want to add just quickly? I do have two other questions.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Perhaps if I could add to Nick's comments that in our experience, the prevention and the detection side of our work invariably means we're ahead of the crime or in the process of the crime, and we've found that
Mr. Pegley, I'm just going to intervene for a moment. Actually, for both witnesses, it's really important just that we get the positioning on the headphone microphone proper. So we're going to try that again with you, Mr. Pegley, to see if this is working. So if we could actually just perform a really quick test before you continue. I'll pause the clock, Madame O'Rourke.
Does this work? Is this a better position?
Yeah, if we could just, do you have a little bit higher? If you could raise the arm, the arm bar on the microphone. Yeah, try that.
Okay, thank you. So we, while we share intelligence between private sector participants, we also have relationships, formal relationships with all state and federal law enforcement agencies, which enables them to task us with operational information to support their work, which is usually after the fact. So invariably, we focus on trying to share consumer-based information as rapidly as we can across the ecosystem. After the fact, the law enforcement agencies will be very keen to get the mass data to support their operations work, but invariably the crime is after the fact. Most of the crime that we've come across is offshore, unfortunately. There are some domestic money mule activity that has been identified and some SIMBOX work that Nick was talking about earlier, but invariably most of the bad actors that are affecting the Australian community are international.
A couple of things. One, can you remind this committee of the results you've seen in Australia in just 1 year following the introduction of your new framework? How have the platforms responded in Australia, and how key is awareness for customers to know that it's difficult to recover funds?
There's a few pieces there. So the scam prevention framework legislation passed, but it is still in the process of implementation. So it's actually a little bit too early to say the direct impact of that legislation, although even announcing the scam prevention framework had a positive effect in terms of encouraging collaboration between the sectors, and we have seen a reduction in scam volumes. The numbers are unfortunately a little difficult because there are some multiple sources and there are some legitimate questions about the best way to count them. But the probably the worst description would be that they're flat and everything better and every other option is better than that. So collaboration between the sectors. We have managed to do some significant pilots at this stage with the platforms where information has been shared from banks back to the platforms who have been able to take that information and use it to take down scam content. As the SPF rolls out and comes up to industrial scale, we expect to see that become an even bigger driver of a reduction in scam loss.
Okay, thank you very much, Madame O'Rourke. Monsieur Saint-Marie, à vous, 6 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And greetings to our two witnesses who have joined us today. Highly appreciated. Mr. Pegley, you didn't have time to make any presentation. If you'd like to make any sort of presentation during the time allotted to my questioning, we would better understand your messaging.
Did that work? Could you hear that interpretation?
In French.
You could hear it in French. Okay, I'll translate that for you. We'll get that fixed. But essentially, Monsieur Saint-Marie was saying that you did not have an opportunity at the outset to provide opening remarks, and he would be happy to provide you with some time during his question period to have you offer an opinion.
Thank you. Perhaps I should briefly describe what the Australian Financial Crimes Exchange does, mainly to support the work that the ABA and other industry bodies are doing. We provide intelligence sharing across multiple industries. So at the moment, we have something like 8 different industries that we share intelligence across. We have something around 100 different members that we share intelligence with in Australia, and we also support separately sharing of intelligence between New Zealand banks for the same purpose. Those industries range from digital media to telcos to insurance companies, obviously banking, telecommunications companies, digital currency exchanges, etc., for the purposes of all 3 parts of, as Nick described, the SPF regime. So in the prevention framework, we'll take information from a victim and we will share that with the relevant digital platform exchange, or we'll share that with the telecommunications company, which has been a very successful way of rapidly taking down in real time those bad attributes that float around the community. But we'll also share intelligence that enables detection of transactions in bad bank accounts or digital currency regimes that have been used to exfiltrate funds and therefore harm the economic benefit to the criminals. We also support tracking and hopefully stopping the funds between institutions in real time to enable, as best as we can, the recovery of funds for victims and on their behalf across the banking sector. And that's a fraud reporting exchange which enables everything from digital currency exchanges before the currency is transferred from fiat to digital, and also in the banking sector to try and stop the funds flowing because they will move very quickly offshore from Australia.
Okay, and just as we proceed with the few minutes you have left, que vous avez qui reste, Monsieur Saint-Marie, Mr. Pegley, just if you could take a look at the bottom of your screen, there should be an opportunity to switch to the English channel. And if you see that option in front of you, that should solve our translation problem. If it doesn't, that's okay. I'll translate for you. Monsieur Saint-Marie, à vous pour continuer.
Oui, donc.
Mr. Saint-Marie, over to you. Yes, could you please signal to me whether you are hearing the interpreter or not? I don't think he is, Mr. Saint-Marie, so please continue. And if I repeat incorrectly, you can correct me. Very well, then. When the new framework was brought in, what difficulties did you run into? And what the different sectors who were involved have to say about the new model? What were the difficulties they ran into, and what were their comments?
Mr. Pegley, did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay, go ahead.
So probably the most interesting aspect of the model of the 360s is identifying relevant attributes to be shared between those sectors. What is useful for a bank to use to detect fraudulent transactions is not the same as it is for a telco. For a digital currency exchange, they have a very different way of tracking transactions. And digital media platforms are not used to tracking transactions in that way at all. So we've worked very hard to identify the relevant attributes to be shared, intelligence to be shared between the platforms. What's an interesting aspect is that in many cases these industries don't necessarily work together very often on common issues. So digital platforms are invariably very strong competitors. Telcos pretty much the same, and the idea that they would collaborate together is a foreign concept. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to build trust between parties when we're sharing intelligence, and if you like, identify the bad actors as the rationale. The banking environment is much more familiar with collaboration around this activity and has been for years, and so that part of the picture has been much easier. But the translation, if you like, between those different sectors of different intelligence that will help them stop the scam has been an effort, but we are getting there.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Okay, Oko.
Thank you very much. Due to the delay, we will cut briefly.
Mr. Mahu will have 2.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and then we are going to go right into a brief suspension followed by in camera to get to the report that we still have to get through today. Mr. Falk, the floor is yours for 2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony this afternoon here, or morning, whatever it is where you are. Just in listening, what is the most effective part of your legislation that you have found in combating scamming?
I would say the most effective component of the legislation is the fact that it frames the responsibilities of each sector as equivalent but different. And what I mean by that is it acknowledges that each sector, because of the technological way it operates, the business model, etc., inevitably has different capabilities and different responsibilities. And some of that goes to the data issues that David was talking about. But the overarching idea that there is a responsibility to work to prevent, detect, and respond to scams, those three labels becomes really important, because working in the banks, I can look at the obligations of the telcos and the platforms and say, okay, what are they doing to prevent scams, and what are we doing? And is it roughly the same? Are we trying to do the same sorts of things? What are we doing to detect scams? And particularly in the data sharing space, that's very important, right? Is the data that we're providing helpful, etc., and response. So having that overarching framework that cuts across the regulatory silos, because historically each of those sectors is regulated in its own silo, like the sector has its own regulator, and they don't always work together, outside those vertical boundaries. And by forcing discussion both at industry level but also at regulator level across the silos, I think that's probably the foundational thing that is of greatest benefit in the scam prevention framework.
Okay, and have you found that the social media platforms have also been cooperative?
They are working with us on a number of the initiatives in the framework. I think it's fair to say that they had a longer journey to take, and perhaps have a little way further to go. But at the moment, the impetus of the legal obligation is encouraging collaboration, and we are working with them on a number of fronts to make that collaboration real.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Falk. Mr. Ma, the floor is yours, 2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the short notice. Obviously, I applaud the Australian model, and we've seen some successes. But despite these successes, there are still vulnerabilities that exist in addressing financial frauds within the Australian banking system. For example, according to the Consumers Federation of Australia, scam losses for First Nations people increased by more than 70% to 6.5 million. This raises a bit of good faith concern about equity. If we were to apply Australia's model to Canadian context, why does this disparity exist?
I think I made the observation earlier that there is a scam for everybody in society, and the scammers are brilliant at targeting the attributes and the vulnerabilities of every community. A different example, you know, many of the people who came to Australia from Vietnam or China will be victims of scams where people pretend to be from the legal authorities of those countries. For First Nations people, there's a particular challenge around what we call scambling, which is a type of scam that looks like an online game, and they get quite popular amongst the communities. And the main intervention there, which banks take very seriously, is community education to explain that what looks like a way to entertain yourself and perhaps earn a little bit of money is in fact a scam. Now, one of the challenges is the boundary between legal and illegal gambling is not always clear. So working with regulators to make that more precise is also important. But I think your broader points there is you know, everyone in society is susceptible to some type of scam, and education is one of the key tools to assist with that, to make sure that people are aware of how they are being targeted by the scammers.
Thank you very much. So how can Canada build on Australia's success while ensuring that no community is left behind?
Well, I think the broader success does come from the ecosystem type approach. So sharing responsibility amongst all of those players. And I know that a lot of the focus at the moment is on banks, telcos, and digital platforms, but there are other sectors that play a critical role. So they also need to be included to make sure that no one is left behind. The best way to do that is actually to be smart about the use of data. So we are working to improve the quality of the data that actually tells us who has been scammed, what type of scam, what were their demographics, etc. And if we can use that well, we can understand much better the specific nature of the scam and the target and how it's implemented. And that allows preventative measures, education measures, whatever, to be focused. A general sort of be careful of scammers type message. If it works at all, it works for a few months only, and then it just becomes background noise. So you need targeted message around the specific scams based on data.
I think my time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Ma. Gentlemen, thank you very much for appearing here today. I know it felt a little bit short, but we actually had a much smaller panel than we typically would, which means that we probably actually got more questions into you than we otherwise would have, which is great. I would simply encourage you, as best as you possibly can, to keep tabs on the next few meetings that this committee is undertaking in relation to the topic at hand. And if there are things you're seeing that you think would be a mistake for the Government of Canada, things that you would applaud in terms of next directions based on the experiences that you've had in Australia, we would certainly welcome that feedback, not only as an ally, but clearly as leaders in this field in your respective jurisdictions. So, gentlemen, thank you. Wish you a very nice rest of your day in Australia. Colleagues, we are going to suspend briefly. Monsieur Saint-Marie, on va t'envoyer un nouveau lien.
We'll send you a new link.
To take about a 5-minute break or so as we turn over, and we'll get back to work. Suspended.
Thank you.